Right, and a very good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning in this particular session, which is to build your real estate business. This is the introduction session to CMAs. And in this particular session, I want to make sure that each one of you understands the fundamental elements of a CMA, why you need to use it, and how it's actually going to help you in going forward. So this particular session, it is headed by the word introduction. So for those of you that are at an advanced level in real estate and you understand CMAs already, this is just to recap those foundational elements and start bringing that all together. In total, this is a 5-part series that I will be rolling out. So over the next 5 weeks, we'll be rolling out this particular series, and you will see each of these sessions will step it up a notch until the final session, where you will be able to go out, complete a CMA, present a CMA, and end up with a property that's well priced. So I want to thank everybody for coming on to this particular session. Let's kick in. And as usual, where do I start? Well, I always start with how to get the most out of today and this particular session. So first, we start with P, which is your participation. Participation is so vital in any training session that you take part of. Don't sit there on your phone looking through your social media swipes. Spend the time to focus. That's why with a lot of my sessions, I keep them short and sweet and right to that golden nugget that you can take away at the end of the session. Secondly, curiosity. If you've got a question, pop it in the chat box. At the end of the session, I will have a Q&A where you can ask questions and I will dig deeper into that. And if you're watching the session, don't forget, pop it in the comments below, because I do answer and look at every single one of those comments and I will answer those questions. And lastly is your commitments. You see, when you go into a training session and you're just sitting and listening and walk out of that training session feeling a little bit motivated, got a little bit of inspiration under your step, but you don't take any action, that training session was actually working against you. So it's your participation, your curiosity, and your commitment of what you learned. Take it forward so that you can have the most amount of benefit for you in your business as well as in your life. A lot of my sessions, I actually add some additional elements to it, which really will help you in your life size as well. So let's have a look at the importance of a CMA. And the big question that really comes right to the top is the why. Why have a CMA? And there are 3 points that I'm going to share with you that really will start to solidify and bring this together so that you can understand the importance of a CMA. It's not just a piece of paper that's printed from Lightstone. It's not just a piece of paper that's been given to you by someone else that you hand in to one of your sellers or one of your buyers. This is something that's going to give you that educational part. When you start to integrate the information from that CMA, you internalize it, you'll be able to educate your clients and you'll become that professional that every one of your clients is wanting you to be. So let's have a look at the very first point. And this is probably right out of the gate, probably the most important reason why we have a CMA and the biggest why behind it. It helps to set the right price. You see, so often our sellers, when they start looking at selling their property and putting on the market, they'll go through all the different portals. They will see all those overpriced properties and they'll say, hey, but my neighbor is at that price. My house is better. So what do they go and do? They go and want to list it higher than their neighbor. However, their neighbor never had a real estate agent like you guys, because that real estate agent didn't do a CMA. They didn't get that house priced correctly, which means for the next 12 to 24 years, that house stays on the market and it never sells. And same with that particular seller. So number one, it helps to set the right price for our clients. The second is it also attracts those potential buyers. Because if a property is priced correctly, ultimately, you will have an influx of buyers coming through that property. Now, there is an additional component when you can have a conversation with buyers and telling them, hey, in this particular suburb, these are the correct prices for the suburb. Your buyer will actually say, hey, that's actually outside of my affordability. Or, hey, I didn't know I could afford that. Let's have a look at prices or properties in that particular area. So one, when you price it correctly, it's going to attract potential buyers for your properties. And ultimately, without a buyer, we don't make commission and we don't get that professional fee that goes forward. And the last part, it aids in negotiations. You see, a CMA price is not a price that is going to market at. A CMA price is a price that is your negotiation point. You see, you might want to list it slightly higher or slightly lower, depending on the trends of the market. And in future sessions, I will share with you how to read the trends of a market, whether you should price it above that CMA value or below that CMA value. But ultimately, that CMA value is based around what has already sold, what has already registered. And that's a key component. And that will aid in your negotiations when you're talking with your buyers as well as your sellers when you're wanting to get those listings. So why? One, it sets that price, which is that underlying component. It helps to attract those particular buyers or potential buyers, as well as adding in those negotiations when you start going forward. And one of the biggest negotiation points that I have when I've sat down with sellers is they want to list it high. I present them, I educate them, my CMA, and when there is no buyers that come through the front door, no inquiries that come through, the first negotiation that we start with is a price negotiation or a price correction to get it down where we can get potential buyers in. Without that CMA, you're working in a very volatile area where it's just hearsay, and you don't want that. You want to basically have that information, and more importantly, when you're giving that information through to your buyers and to your sellers, it's actually substantiated information. This is information that's coming from Lightstone reports, coming from the deeds office, and you're actually saying this is what the market is looking at right now. So that CMA is so, so important. And if you are not doing any kind of pricing CMA in your listing presentations, you need to start doing that right now. Because I have this script that I share out with so many people. Is there anything but the price that's preventing you from signing this mandate right now? You see, the key component there is anything but the price. It's a yes or no answer, and you'll see in future sessions how we use that particular script when we're going through that seller's presentation. Whether we go into a full presentation, we carry on and get that mandate signed. So now we know why we need this particular CMA. Now we're going to look at the definitions and the purpose. Well, for many of us, we hear this acronym. And what was so ironic is yesterday I did a session which spoke about terminology and acronyms. And for many people, they hear an acronym, and especially if you're new to real estate, you're going to go, what is a CMA? I have no idea. What is he talking about? So this was so imperative that I included this into this particular presentation, which is defining what a CMA is. And it stands for, that acronym CMA stands for a comparative market analysis. Now, why is that so important? Because we're going to be comparing properties that are in the markets. In other words, they haven't sold yet. We're going to be comparing properties that have already sold to your seller's property. So it's a comparative market analysis that you need to make sure that when your seller looks at you with this blank glazed look and you're talking about a CMA, you can just add in there, well, what we're going to do is, and just look at the purpose, we're going to use the CMA to determine a property's fair market value. And that is when you start pulling it together. It's very easy to define it as a comparative market analysis, but why? Why do I need that? I want X in my pockets. My neighbor has got their property listed at this. My house is better and I want more money than them. Well, you can clearly state to them, well, that seller is never going to sell their property. And with the CMA, our purpose is to determine the property's fair market value because it has a much bigger picture that it actually incorporates. A bigger picture, especially when buyers are wanting to get a bond. Because if it's way overpriced and the bank comes through to evaluate and they don't see value in the property, that buyer is not going to get a bond, which means that property is not going to get sold, even if you take an offer. So that's where the CMA is coming through to determine the property's fair market price. And I want to make sure that each one of you understand that when you're sitting with your sellers as well as your buyers. Now, there are some key components that you need to include in your CMA. And these key components, there's 4 of them that I'm going to share with you. And really, at the end of this particular session, what I want you to do is I want you to take the property that you're living in or a property that you're currently working on, and I want you to build a CMA. You see, these particular sessions that I'm going through, these are not just listen-in only sessions. These are going to be sessions where you need to start putting together some prep work. So when we move into the next sessions, you've actually taken your level up a notch. So what are these 4 components that we actually need for today? Well, there's just 4 of them that we need to look at. Number 1 is property details. Now, when I'm talking about property details, I'm not just talking about the street address. I'm talking about the earth number, the suburb. I want all of those particular details. Why is that so important? Because when we start getting through to mandates and offer to purchases, we need to talk in a professional manner. You see, I was working with a client or an agent yesterday, and they said to me, but I'm trying to find this particular property. And they were just putting in an address or the actual street name. And Lightstone was coming up with about 5 different suburbs around South Africa where the same street name exists. And that happens all the time. So we need to define that right down, because if we're looking at 123 Banana Street and there's 10 123 Banana Streets in South Africa, we could be looking at a golf resort that is right on the beach, which the average prices are like 15 to 20 million. Or we could be looking at 123 Banana Street in just a local suburb where the average price is about 1 to 1.2 million. So we need to make sure that we have all those property details as far as the actual address. But then we need to go one step further. We know the address. What more details do we know? What more details do we need to know? How many bedrooms? How many bathrooms? Does it have a garage? Kitchen, laundry, scullery, main bedroom? Is it en suite? Are there carpets? Are there tiles? Is there a garden? Is it pet friendly? Does it have a pool? Does it have an entertainment area? You can see that when we start looking at property details, we need to go beyond just the address. We need to go to all of those details. And something that's coming up very much in our society right now because of load shedding is we've got a lot of clients wanting to put solar panels on their roof. Now, you can start looking at adding into your property details roof structures. Is that roof capable of holding solar panels? Because if that house is built before 1984, and I think it's in the early 80s, the roof struts needs to be reinforced to hold the weight of the solar panels. Else, if you're selling a house from the 1970s where it originally had a tin roof and they replaced it to a tiled roof, the actual wooden beams are not geared to hold that additional weight, which means if they put solar panels on, that could actually end up in a major problem. So when you start looking at property details, you need to start looking at so much about that particular property, not just its address, but going even further. The second is those comparable properties, and there's 2 elements of comparable properties. One, are comparable properties that have already sold. So when you've got the property details and you know 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and X amount of suburb, and there's so much under roof, you can then compare that with properties that have currently sold. Why is it so important? Because now we know, one, the banks, they're actually giving bonds in those particular areas at that particular amount, and the buyers are looking at that particular amount. So those comparable properties of what is sold. We also need to have comparable properties of what's on the market. That's our competition stock. If out of 5 properties, we're the most expensive, well, it's quite an easy conversation with your seller. Mr. Seller, yours is the most expensive. There's 5 properties that needs to sell. We're averaging 2 properties a month, which means we're looking at 2.5 months before we get an active buyer. Now, I know that script comes out quite quick, but in future sessions, I will be going in through that a little bit deeper with you guys. So when we're looking at comparable properties, what has sold and what is currently on the market? And remember, we're comparing apples with apples. That is why it's so important to start with those property details. Then, number 3 are the market statistics. Now, market statistics is good when it starts looking at trends. Is the market going up? Is the market going down? How many properties have sold in the last 3 months, the last 12 months? What has sold? Is it freeholds or sectional titles? What are the age group of the people that are buying, that are selling? These are the market statistics. And the great thing here is Lightstone gives you a 1-page report that gives you all that information. And we will be covering that in a future session. So do make sure that you are familiar with Lightstone, because that's where I incorporate into my future training sessions. So market statistics, you need to know that to have those particular conversations with your sellers, because as I just shared with you, it also becomes part of a script that you use with your sellers. And then finally, this is the part that we're all building up to, is price recommendations. You see, a price recommendation is not a set price. We never go to a seller and say, your property, I see it's valued at 1.6 million. We never give them a fixed price. We give them pricing recommendations, which is a variant price. The reason we don't give them a fixed price is we don't have an NQF level 6 in valuations of properties. So if you do have an NQF level 6, it's a 3-year degree, then you're able to give them a fixed price, and that price can be held in a court. But we don't have that. The highest that we go up to in real estate is an NQF 5. So we can only give pricing recommendations, and that's a pricing variance. And once you've got all that information, you'll be able to say, my CMA value price is between 1.2 and 1.6. Giving them that variance price, but it's a recommendation, and there we go forward from there. And in a future session, I will show you how to take that CMA value and work with these pricing variants as to what's the price that we need to list at. And that's going to be coming in future sessions as well. So the key components: 1, property details; 2, comparable properties; 3, those market statistics that you need; and 4, those pricing recommendations, so that you know that you're going to get that listing and being able to sell it. Now, once you've got all of these key components, the final part of this is setting those expectations with your sellers. You see, don't go in with the expectation that, of course, I can sell your property in 7 days, overpriced. When you start over delivering, you're going to find that those promises are going to start coming very short, and your reputation is going to be tarnished. So there's just some pointers that I wanted to add in to this particular session when you're setting those sellers' expectations. The first one, make sure that your communication with your seller is honest. If you don't know the answer, be honest that you don't know the answer, and tell them, hey, I'm not aware of that, but I will look into it and I will come back to you. And you make sure that you do come back to them. Make sure all that communication is honest. You see, when we go into a Lightstone report, we can manipulate it to whatever we want. Unfortunately, there are agents that have done that. They will create 1-page CMA reports that are totally manipulated, that has got no honesty attached to it. And all that does is it tarnishes our industry. So make sure that your communication with them is honest at all times. The second is managing that seller's expectation. When a seller is saying to me, hey, I need to sell my house in 30 days, but the market is very low and buyers are very low at the moment. And we're finding that the average time a property is on the market is about 78 to 82 days before we get an offer. You need to manage that expectation to that seller and make them aware of it. Don't fulfill promises that you cannot deliver, because all it's going to do, as I said, it's going to tarnish your reputation in the actual industry. So managing that seller's expectations, how do we do that? Ask them, what do you expect from me? What do you expect from your actual property? Understand their wants and needs and deliver what you can do in an honest fashion. And then last, set your role as an advisor. You see, when we come into real estate, we are advising our clients on what property or what prices they should list their property. We're advising our clients when we should do viewings, show days, all of this. Make sure that you're coming in as that advisor, educating your sellers. Don't walk in there, take control of everything, and push your seller right out of the picture and overpower it. You see, when it comes down to taking that offer to purchase, that seller is going to have a little bit of resentment because they didn't have anything that was part of this particular negotiation in this deal. And ultimately, they're going to feel despondent, and they could actually become quite a difficult client because at the end of the day, they still need to sign off that documentation. So make sure that when you're actually having those discussions with your sellers, you are an advisor. I am presenting information from Lightstone, from the deeds office, on what has sold. I'm advising you, this is where the market is. And through that particular process, you're going to set yourself an extremely strong foundation to have a very powerful seller's presentation that incorporates a CMA where you get properties that price correctly. And this is a term that I want each and every one of you to write down right now, because I want you to have a 14-day mindset. A 14-day mindset. And what a 14-day mindset is, when I list a property, my mindset is I'm going to sell it in 14 days. If your mindset is to sell a property in 14 days, I promise you now, when you're sitting in front of that seller, they're giving you an overpriced property, your mindset's going to say, I can't sell that in 21 days. I can't sell it in 14 days. It's only going to take about 3-4 months to sell, which means your mindset is going to start taking action, and you'll start moving in a direction to assist and negotiate to get that price so that you can sell it with a mindset of 14 days, not a literal 14 days. But when you're doing that, you will find that you will get those properties priced correctly, and you'll be able to list and sell and start getting into production in your business that actually puts a smile on your face. Start living a life by a design that you want. So that is the introduction of the CMAs. I know there was a lot of foundational elements. You may already be familiar with so much of it, but I wanted to make sure that we covered the foundational elements that we are now going to grow on. So I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to open up to questions and comments in the chat box, or alternatively,